He thought of Leo's laughter, the way the boy's eyes lit up when he saw a dinosaur. He thought of Sophia's weary but determined eyes in the faded photograph, and the strength she must have possessed to raise their son alone under such duress. A deep sense of gratitude mingled with his guilt. He had so much to make up for, so many lost years to reclaim. This was not just a legal battle for custody. It was a personal crusade for redemption and the forging of a true family. His days were a rigid schedule of early morning workouts, strategic board meetings, and relentless negotiations. His office, a minimalist masterpiece of glass and chrome, reflected his inner world sleek, efficient, and devoid of personal touches. There were no photographs, no sentimental trinkets, nothing to distract from the pursuit of Thorne Industries' unyielding growth. He rarely socialized, finding solace only in the cold, logical patterns of market trends and financial reports. Emotions were a luxury he couldn't afford, a distraction from his singular purpose. He believed his life was perfectly calibrated, a flawless machine running on pure intellect and will. Alexander turned from the window, his expression resolute. The paper, once a mere legal document, now felt like a sacred contract. He was ready to fight for his son, for Sophia, for the family that fate had brought back to him. The cold, impenetrable walls around his heart had finally crumbled, making way for a future he never dared to dream of. The undeniable truth of the DNA test, coupled with the damning evidence of Mark Jensen's treachery, had solidified Alexander's resolve. The flickering warmth in his heart had ignited into a burning fire of purpose. He wasted no time. His first priority was to finally speak with Sophia, not through reports or intermediaries, but face to face, to hear her story, to offer the apology that had been 5 years overdue. Ms. Davies, understanding the profound personal stakes, had located Sophia in a modest apartment in a quiet Brooklyn neighborhood, yet, unbeknownst to him, the universe had a different plan. A small, innocent cog was about to be dropped into his well-oiled machine, threatening to derail everything he thought he knew. This tiny, unforeseen variable would soon utter a single, life-altering word, "Daddy," and shatter the impenetrable fortress around his heart, forcing him to confront a past he had painstakingly buried and a future he never imagined. The icy walls he had built around himself were about to face their first, most unexpected warmth, the hum of the air conditioning, the distant drone of city traffic. These were the only sounds typically allowed to disturb the solemn silence of Alexander Thorne's office. It was a sanctuary of control, where every decision was made with surgical precision, every outcome calculated. But on this particular Tuesday afternoon, an anomaly shattered the calm. Alexander drove himself. The sleek black luxury car, a stark contrast to the unassuming street he found himself on. The buildings were older, the cafes smaller, the pace of life noticeably slower than the frenetic energy of Manhattan. This was Sophia's world, a world he had inadvertently pushed her into. Guilt gnawed at him, a sharp, unfamiliar pain. He had always been so convinced of his own rightness, his own victimhood. Now, he saw the devastating consequences of his self-imposed ignorance. His usually unflappable executive assistant, Ms. Davies, appeared at the door, her composure visibly shaken. "Mr. Thorne," she began, her voice a strained whisper. "There's a situation." Alexander raised an eyebrow, his gaze unwavering from the complex financial report on his tablet. Situations were for others to manage. His world was impervious. He found Sophia's apartment building, a brick structure with peeling paint and a faint scent of old cooking. He stood before her door for a long moment, the cool metal of the doorknob beneath his hand, a sudden, tangible connection to a past he had both cherished and condemned. This was it, the moment of reckoning. He took a deep breath, steeling himself not for a business negotiation, but for an emotional battlefield. He knocked, the sound echoing hollowly. Before Ms. Davies could elaborate, a small figure darted from behind her, a blur of bright colors against the muted tones of the office corridor. It was a boy, no older than 5, with wide, curious eyes and a shock of sandy brown hair that tumbled over his forehead. He wore a brightly colored dinosaur t-shirt and held a worn-out teddy bear. The door opened slowly, revealing a woman who was both achingly familiar and painfully changed. Sophia Lee. Her once radiant face was etched with a quiet weariness. Her eyes, though still intelligent and perceptive, held a shadow of past suffering. Her hair, once a cascade of vibrant waves, was pulled back simply, practical rather than stylish. She wore a faded t-shirt and jeans, a stark contrast to the designer attire Alexander was accustomed to. She looked older than her years, and the sight sent a fresh pang of regret through him. The boy paused, his eyes scanning the vast, austere office. When his gaze landed on Alexander, a radiant smile spread across his face, lighting up the room like a sudden burst of sunshine. Sophia's eyes, wide with disbelief, fixated on Alexander. Her lips parted, but no sound emerged. She clutched a dish towel to her chest, her knuckles white. "Alexander," she whispered, the name a fragile breath. "What? Why are you here?" "Daddy." Alexander's throat tightened. He had rehearsed 100 apologies in his head, but now, faced with the living embodiment of his past mistakes, words failed him. He simply looked at her, searching her eyes for any trace of the girl he had loved. He saw pain, confusion, and a flicker of something he couldn't quite decipher, perhaps a fragile hope or a lingering fear. The single word, uttered with pure, unadulterated joy, echoed through the cavernous space. Alexander's hand, poised over his tablet, froze. The tablet slipped from his grasp, clattering softly against the polished floor. His eyes, usually sharp and unreadable, widened in a mixture of shock and profound bewilderment. "Daddy." The word itself felt alien on the air, an impossible intrusion into his carefully constructed, childless existence. An unsettling tremor ran through him, a premonition of chaos. "Sophia," he began, his voice rougher than he intended. We need to talk. Ms. Davies rushed forward, her apologies tumbling out. "Mr. Thorne, I'm so terribly sorry." He slipped past security. "He insisted he was. He said he was your son." Her face was pale with mortification. She hesitated, her gaze darting behind him as if expecting someone else. Then, with a slow, deliberate nod, she opened the door wider. The small apartment was neat, filled with the comforting clutter of a child's life, a brightly colored rug, a stack of picture books, a half-built Lego castle on the coffee table. The faint scent of crayons and comfort food filled the air. It was a humble home, yet it exuded a warmth he hadn't felt in years in his own sterile penthouse. Alexander's voice, when it came, was a low, dangerous growl. "My son. That's absurd. What is the meaning of this?" His eyes, now narrowed to slits, pierced the boy. His mind, accustomed to dissecting corporate conspiracies, immediately began to search for the angle, the manipulation, the hidden agenda behind this audacious intrusion. This child was clearly a pawn in some elaborate scheme to destabilize him. To tarnish Thorne Industries' impeccable reputation, he would not be swayed by such an obvious ploy. They sat at a small kitchen table, a chipped ceramic mug of lukewarm tea placed before him by Sophia, who remained on edge. Alexander laid the DNA test results on the table between them. Her eyes, filled with apprehension, slowly read the words. A tear, silent and heavy, escaped and rolled down her cheek. The boy, oblivious to the icy hostility radiating from Alexander, took another step forward. He pointed a chubby finger at Alexander's pristine designer tie. "Daddy's tie is shiny," he chirped, his eyes sparkling. That innocent observation, that simple declaration of admiration, struck an unfamiliar chord deep within Alexander. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor of something akin to longing. It was quickly suppressed, buried under layers of suspicion and denial. "Leo is my son," Alexander stated, his voice low, heavy with a mixture of remorse and nascent joy. "I know now. And Sophia, I am so deeply sorry. For everything, for not knowing, for not being there, for believing you abandoned me." Alexander clenched his jaw, his gaze hardening. "Take him out," he commanded Miss Davies, his voice devoid of emotion. "Find out who he is, who sent him, every detail, and ensure this incident does not leave this room." He turned his back to the boy, facing the cityscape, as if the sheer force of his will could make the child disappear. Sophia covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. When she finally looked up, her eyes were red-rimmed but resolute. "You don't know. You don't know what I went through. Alexander, when I found out I was pregnant, I was terrified, but I was also so happy, so hopeful. I tried to tell you, I tried to reach out, but every single time, something blocked me. But the boy remained, Daddy, don't you want to play? His voice was small, laced with a hint of confusion, but still innocent. Alexander felt an irrational flicker of irritation, then something else, a strange pull, a sense of responsibility he couldn't name or understand. This small, unexpected visitor, with his undeniable presence and that single, shocking word, had already begun to chip away at the formidable walls around Alexander Thorne's heart. He was unprepared for the seismic shift this child's arrival would bring, a shift that would force him to re-examine not just his past, but the very foundation of his future. The perfectly calibrated machine was malfunctioning, and its gears were about to grind to a halt. The air in Alexander's office, usually so crisply controlled, now felt heavy, charged with an unfamiliar tension. Leo, the small boy who had upended his meticulously ordered world, sat quietly on a plush visitor's chair, occasionally glancing at Alexander, with an innocent curiosity that unnerved the CEO more than any hostile takeover bid ever could. Alexander, meanwhile, maintained a facade of unwavering focus on his tablet. Though the words on the screen blurred into an indecipherable mess, his mind raced, constructing elaborate scenarios, each more paranoid than the last. Trying to rationalize this impossible intrusion, she began to recount the agonizing tale of the last 5 years. The initial joy of learning about her pregnancy quickly overshadowed by the chilling realization that all her attempts to contact Alexander were failing. Her emails bounced back, her calls went straight to voicemail, then were disconnected. She spoke of her growing despair, her fear, as her meager savings dwindled and her options vanished. The cold logic that had governed his life for decades was giving way to an emotional landscape he was only just beginning to explore. He was no longer just the CEO of Thorne Industries. He was Leo's father. The weight of that title, once unimaginable, now felt like an anchor, grounding him, giving him a purpose beyond profit margins and market shares. The flicker of hope had ignited into a steady flame, illuminating a path towards a life he had never believed was possible for him. A life of love, family, and genuine connection. The transformation had begun, irreversible and profound, as Alexander Thorne finally embraced the undeniable truth of his heart. Then the threats started, she continued, her voice trembling. Anonymous messages, telling me to disappear, to get rid of the baby. Men showing up at my first apartment, just watching me, making me feel hunted. They told me if I ever tried to contact you, or if anyone found out about Leo, there would be severe consequences. They knew everything about me, about my family. I was terrified. Alexander. I had no one, nowhere to go. I just wanted to protect Leo. Ms. Davies. A picture of efficiency, normally, moved with uncharacteristic hesitation as she returned, a thick file clutched in her hands. Mr. Thorne. I've managed to get some preliminary information. The boy's name is Leo Lee. He seems to have genuinely believed this was his father's office. There's no record of a Leo Lee ever having been here before. Her voice trailed off, sensing the dangerous edge to Alexander's silence. Alexander listened, his face a mask of stone. Each word was a fresh stab of pain, a horrifying confirmation of the reports he had read. He clenched his fists, knuckles white. The image of Sophia, pregnant and alone, facing such terror, sent a wave of uncontrollable rage through him. Just as Alexander was about to issue a fresh barrage of demands, the heavy oak doors of his office swung open without a knock, a rare breach of protocol, even for the most senior executives. Standing in the doorway, framed against the soft glow of the corridor lights, was a woman who commanded respect with every fiber of her being, Eleanor Thorne. Alexander's formidable mother and the matriarch of the Thorne Empire had returned. Her elegant silver hair was swept back in a sophisticated chignon, and her sapphire eyes, usually sharp and discerning, held a hint of fatigue from her transatlantic flight, yet they sparkled with an unmistakable inner fire. I tried to start over, Sophia continued, her voice gaining strength, moving from place to place, taking any job I could find. It was so hard. Alexander, raising Leo alone, with no support, always looking over my shoulder. People looked at me with such pity, or worse, judgment. But Leo, he was my everything. He was worth every struggle. Eleanor's gaze, accustomed to sweeping over grand ballrooms and corporate boardrooms, paused. It landed first on the small, unexpected figure perched on the chair. Her steps, usually swift and purposeful, slowed. Leo, sensing a new presence, looked up, his teddy bear clutched tightly in his small hands. Their eyes met across the vast expanse of Alexander's office. "Mark Jensen!" Alexander finally interrupted, his voice a low, dangerous whisper. It was Mark, wasn't it? He orchestrated all of this? A gasp, soft yet profound, escaped Eleanor's lips. She moved, not towards Alexander, but towards Leo. Alexander, rooted to the spot, watched in stunned silence as his mother, a woman known for her stoic grace and emotional restraint, sank to her knees before the boy. Sophia flinched, her eyes widening. How did you know? My dear child," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Her elegant hands, adorned with exquisite rings, reached out to cup Leo's small face. Leo, perhaps sensing the genuine warmth emanating from her, leaned into her touch. And then, as if a dam had broken, tears welled in Eleanor's eyes, silent rivulets tracing paths down her perfectly composed cheeks. They weren't tears of sorrow, but of an overwhelming, profound joy that radiated from her very soul. Alexander laid out the evidence: the shell corporations, the blocked communications, the hired thugs, the subtle manipulations that had fueled his belief in her betrayal. He explained Mark's deep-seated jealousy, his unrequited affections for Sophia, and his desperate ambition to surpass Alexander. "Leo, oh, my precious Leo," she murmured, pulling the bewildered boy gently into her embrace. She held him tightly, her face buried in his soft hair, rocking him gently. Alexander had never, in his entire life, seen his mother so completely undone by emotion. This woman, who had faced down hostile executives and weathered countless family scandals with an unshakable facade, was weeping openly, her face contorted with a mixture of disbelief and boundless happiness. "He hated you, Alexander. He wanted to destroy everything you cared about," Sophia confirmed, her voice filled with a fresh wave of bitterness. "He told me he would ruin your reputation, expose some fabricated scandal if I didn't disappear. He said he'd make sure Leo would never know his father. I was desperate. I truly believed I was protecting you. And Leo, by running away, Mother!" Alexander finally found his voice, a sharp command cutting through the intimate moment. "What is the meaning of this? You cannot simply—" The full weight of Mark Jensen's monstrous deception crushed Alexander. He had been a pawn in his rival's cruel game, his love for Sophia twisted into a weapon against them both. He saw clearly now how his own emotional detachment, his quickness to believe the worst, had played right into Mark's hands. He had pushed Sophia away when she needed him most, leaving her to face a nightmare alone. Eleanor pulled back from Leo, her eyes shining with unshed tears, and looked directly at Alexander. Her gaze was soft, yet intensely resolute, a look that had always disarmed him, even in his youth. "Alexander," she said, her voice trembling slightly but firm. "Look at him. Really look. Do you not see it?" "Sophia," Alexander said, his voice raw with emotion. "I am so incredibly sorry. I was blind. I was a fool. I should have trusted you. Should have found you. I promise you, Mark Jensen will pay for every single minute of pain he inflicted upon you and Leo. He will regret the day he ever crossed our path." Alexander's eyes, against his will, flickered to Leo. The boy, still nestled in Eleanor's arms, looked up at Alexander with eyes that held an uncanny familiarity. The shape of his jaw, the curve of his brows, even the slight furrow in his brow when he was concentrating. They were all undeniably Alexander. A cold dread, far more unsettling than his initial suspicions of a corporate plot, began to creep into Alexander's heart. Sophia looked at him, her eyes finally softening, a glimmer of the old Sophia returning. It's not entirely your fault, Alexander. He was very cunning, but it's so good to know the truth, to finally understand." Eleanor, still cradling Leo, then reached into the boy's small backpack that Ms. Davies had placed on the floor beside them. She pulled out a faded, slightly crumpled photograph and a small embroidered handkerchief. The photo, creased at the edges, showed a young woman with a bright, earnest smile, holding a baby no older than a year. On the corner of the handkerchief, embroidered in delicate, looping script, was a single name, Sophia. The confrontation was painful, a raw excavation of old wounds. But it was also cathartic. The truth, though agonizing, brought with it a profound sense of relief. The air between them, thick with years of unspoken words and unresolved pain, slowly began to clear. Alexander reached across the table, taking Sophia's hand in his. Her fingers were slender, roughened by work, but in his grasp, they felt like a lifeline. The air suddenly felt thin. Alexander's breath hitched in his throat. Sophia. The name, buried deep beneath years of calculated indifference and hardened resolve, clawed its way to the surface of his memory. Sophia Lee, his college sweetheart, the vibrant, intelligent woman who had once, against all his self-imposed barriers, managed to pierce the icy shell around his heart. The woman who had, or so he believed, betrayed him and vanished without a trace, leaving him with a wound that festered beneath his controlled exterior. This was not just a reunion, it was a recommitment, a silent vow to reclaim what was lost, to build a future from the ashes of betrayal. Alexander knew the road ahead would be long and challenging. There was the emotional healing, the legal battle for Leo's custody, and the inevitable confrontation with Mark Jensen. But standing there, holding Sophia's hand, the warmth of hope spreading through him, Alexander felt a strength he had never known. He was no longer alone. He had Sophia, and he had Leo. And for them, he would fight. The silence in the small Brooklyn apartment was thick with the weight of unearthed truths and fresh, raw emotions. Sophia's revelations about Mark Jensen's cruel machinations had ignited a cold fury in Alexander's heart, eclipsing any lingering resentment he harbored towards Sophia herself. His hand, still grasping hers across the worn kitchen table, tightened in a silent promise of retribution and protection. Sophia, Alexander repeated, the name a raw whisper on his lips. His mind, usually a fortress of logic, was bombarded by fragments of a long-suppressed past whispered promises, shared laughter under starlit skies, and then the bitter, agonizing pain of her sudden disappearance. He had convinced himself she was a fleeting mistake, a lesson in why emotional attachments were dangerous. But this child, this name, it challenged everything he had chosen to believe. Mark Jensen will pay, Alexander reiterated, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. Every single penny, every ounce of his power. He will lose everything he ever built, and then some. For what he did to you, Sophia. For what he stole from Leo and from us. Yes, Sophia, Eleanor confirmed, her eyes still on Leo, then glancing at Alexander with a knowing sadness. Leo's mother, he says, and looking at him, Alexander, I have no doubt in my heart. This child is yours. Her unwavering conviction, combined with the growing evidence, slowly began to erode the icy foundations of Alexander's skepticism. He took the photograph from Eleanor's trembling hand, his fingers brushing against hers, a contact that felt profoundly significant. The young woman in the picture, though changed by time and the harshness of life that was subtly visible in her eyes, was undeniably Sophia, and the baby in her arms, with those same curious eyes, was undoubtedly Leo. The sheer weight of this revelation pressed down on him, suffocating his rational defenses. Ms. Davies, Alexander said, his voice hoarse, his gaze still fixed on the photograph. I want every possible resource dedicated to finding Sophia Lee. Every record, every lead. Do whatever it takes. And I want to know everything about this boy's birth, every detail of his early life. I need answers. Now, his command, though still sharp, lacked its usual cold detachment, a new urgency, a profound, unsettling blend of fear and a burgeoning sense of responsibility had entered his tone. Let him. Alexander's eyes glinted with unyielding resolve. Every desperate move he makes will only serve to expose him further. He has no idea what he's truly up against. He chose to attack my family. Now he will face Thorn Industries. And me, as Leo's father. He still resisted the emotional implications, clinging to the idea of a logical explanation, an intricate deception. But deep down, a tiny, almost imperceptible crack had formed in his carefully constructed facade. The image of Sophia, the word daddy, echoing in the silence of his office. and the undeniable resonance in his mother's tear-filled eyes. They were pulling him towards a truth he had desperately avoided. This was no mere corporate scheme. This was personal. This was fate. And it was about to unravel a dark, painful secret he had buried for far too long. The shadow of his past, long dormant, was finally stirring. Alexander Thorne was a man who prized control above all else. His life was a meticulously crafted symphony of data, logic, and predictable outcomes. But the sudden, startling appearance of a 5-year-old boy named Leo, combined with his mother Eleanor's tearful conviction and the faded photograph of Sophia, had introduced a discordant note, a wild, unpredictable melody into his carefully orchestrated existence. The shadow of Sophia, a figure he had banished from his thoughts for years, now loomed large, demanding answers he wasn't sure he wanted to face. True to his word, Alexander moved with the speed and precision of a predator. He immediately convened his top legal team, led by his most trusted counsel, Ms. Davies, who had already been meticulously gathering evidence. The paternity test results were undeniable. Sophia's detailed, courageous testimony, combined with the irrefutable paper trail of Mark's shell corporations, threatening communications, and suspicious financial transactions, formed an ironclad case. Ms. Davies! Alexander's voice was clipped, a thinly veiled tension beneath his usual executive calm. I want a full team on this. Discretion is paramount. No detail is too small. I want to know everything about Sophia Lee's life since she left university, every address, every job, every person she's interacted with, and most importantly, Leo's birth records, medical history, everything. The first step was to file a petition for full parental custody of Leo. This legal action sent shockwaves through the elite circles of New York's business community. A child from a long-lost college sweetheart, a DNA test, and a custody battle involving the Thorne empire. It was a scandal tailor-made for the tabloids. Mark Jensen, initially confident that he could easily suppress any rumors, found himself caught off guard by Alexander's aggressive and public stance. Ms. Davies, a woman who understood the unspoken urgency in Alexander's commands, nodded grimly. Consider it done. Mr. Thorne, I'll assign our top investigative and legal teams. They will operate with the utmost confidentiality. Mark immediately launched a counteroffensive. He leaked fabricated stories to the press, attempting to portray Sophia as a gold digger and Alexander as a reckless playboy who had abandoned his responsibilities. He used his connections to spread misinformation, casting doubt on the DNA results and suggesting the entire situation was a fraudulent scheme by Sophia and Alexander to damage his company, Jensen Holdings. The following days were a blur of high-stakes corporate maneuvers interspersed with Alexander's relentless pursuit of Sophia's past. He found himself poring over fragmented reports, each piece of information a painful shard from a life he once dismissed as a youthful mistake. The Sophia Lee he remembered was vibrant, idealistic, with a laugh that could chase away the shadows from his own guarded heart. The Sophia Lee revealed in the reports was a ghost of that memory, a woman who had battled unimaginable hardship, loneliness, and a quiet, relentless struggle for survival. But Alexander was prepared. He had anticipated Mark's desperate tactics. Thorne Industries' formidable public relations team, working in tandem with the legal department, systematically countered every false claim with cold, hard facts. They released authenticated medical records proving Sophia's pregnancy 5 years prior. They presented irrefutable evidence of Mark's attempts to block communication between Alexander and Sophia. They even brought forward former employees of Mark's shell corporation, who, under subpoena, testified to the threatening messages and surveillance Sophia had endured. The initial reports confirmed the chilling timeline. Sophia had indeed vanished shortly after their contentious breakup 5 years ago. Alexander had then been convinced she had abandoned him, a belief fueled by a carefully orchestrated misunderstanding that he now suspected was the work of a third party. He remembered the fury, the sense of betrayal that had hardened his heart even further. But the documents now told a different story. The media, initially swayed by Mark's sensational claims, quickly shifted allegiance as the truth began to unravel. Public opinion, fueled by a deep-seated human desire for justice, turned sharply against Mark Jensen. His reputation, once built on shrewd business dealings, was now irrevocably tarnished by accusations of manipulation, harassment, and outright criminality. His investigative team discovered that Sophia, despite her precarious financial situation, had somehow managed to attend all her prenatal appointments at a small, unassuming clinic far from the city's affluent neighborhoods. There were records of her working multiple low-paying jobs, a waitress, a cleaner, even night shifts at a convenience store, all while carrying a child. The sheer physical and emotional toll this must have taken on her was almost unfathomable to Alexander, a man who had never known a single day of financial insecurity. The climax of the legal battle came during a heated court hearing for Leo's custody. Mark Jensen, looking increasingly disheveled and desperate, took the stand, attempting to deny his involvement and smear Sophia's character. But Alexander's lawyer, armed with a trove of evidence, systematically dismantled his every lie. The final blow came when recordings of threatening phone calls, clearly identifiable as Mark's voice, were played in the courtroom, detailing his chilling instructions to force Sophia into hiding and to ensure Alexander never learned about Leo. She was desperate. "Mr. Thorne," one of the investigators reported, his voice tinged with genuine sympathy. "She tried to reach out to you, repeatedly. There were emails sent from various public libraries, even desperate calls from burner phones. But every attempt was met with a blocked number or an unreturned message. It's almost as if someone was actively preventing her from making contact." The court granted Alexander full parental custody of Leo, citing Mark Jensen's egregious interference and Sophia's consistent, truthful testimony. Simultaneously, the district attorney's office, armed with the same evidence presented in the custody hearing, announced a full criminal investigation into Mark Jensen for harassment, conspiracy, and attempted coercion. Mark's reign of terror was over. He was arrested on the spot, his face a mask of disbelief and abject despair as the handcuffs clicked into place. Justice, slow and arduous, had finally arrived. Alexander's jaw tightened. He recalled a period around that time when his communication channels seemed to be experiencing technical glitches. As his IT department had vaguely reported, emails went missing, calls were mysteriously dropped. At the time, he dismissed it as minor inconveniences. Now, a cold, sickening realization dawned on him. Someone had meticulously cut Sophia off from him, ensuring her pleas for help, her attempts to communicate, never reached his ears. With Mark Jensen defeated and facing severe legal consequences, Alexander felt a profound sense of relief. Though the scars of the past remained, he turned to Sophia, whose face was streaked with tears of exhaustion and overwhelming relief. He gently squeezed her hand, a silent promise of a new beginning. The reports detailed Sophia's isolation, her family, living out of state, had reported her missing, but lacked the resources to launch a significant search. Her few college friends eventually lost touch, unable to navigate her sudden and complete withdrawal. Sophia had become a phantom, existing on the fringes of society, raising Leo in anonymity, shielding him from a world that seemed determined to break her. "It's over." "Sophia," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "He can't hurt you or Leo anymore." The investigators had also managed to track down a few of Sophia's former neighbors and colleagues from her most recent, modest apartment complex. Their testimonies painted a heartbreaking picture. Sophia was described as a quiet, hard-working woman, fiercely devoted to her son. But there were also whispers of hardship, of judgment. She was a single mother, you know. One elderly neighbor had told the investigator, always working, but never enough. Some people, they looked down on her. The words resonated with the cruel prejudices Alexander had witnessed within his own elite circles. The subtle, yet devastating stigma associated with single parenthood, especially when unaccompanied by wealth or influence. Sophia, after years of living in fear, finally allowed herself to truly believe it. A fragile smile touched her lips. "Thank you, Alexander, for everything, for believing me, for fighting for us." And then came the most damning piece of information. The investigative team uncovered records of suspicious financial transactions and phone calls leading back to a shell corporation linked to Mark Jensen. Mark Jensen. Alexander's mind recoiled, his longtime rival. A man who had always been a thorn in his side, relentlessly competing for every deal, every accolade. Mark was from a prominent, albeit less influential, family than the Thorns, and his envy of Alexander had always been palpable. thinly disguised beneath a veneer of false camaraderie. The resolution was not just a legal victory, but a deeply personal one. Alexander had formally embraced his role as Leo's father, his commitment unwavering. He knew that the journey of rebuilding their family would be challenging. 5 years of lost time, of pain and misunderstanding, couldn't be erased overnight. But with Mark Jensen's toxic influence removed, they now had the chance to heal, to learn to trust, and to build a genuine, loving home for Leo. The reports detailed how Mark had, through intermediaries, bought out Sophia's original apartment lease, forcing her to move to a more isolated location. He had hired private investigators to track her, not to help her, but to ensure her silence and continued separation from Alexander. There were even records of threatening messages, delivered anonymously, warning Sophia to stay away from Alexander Thorne and to keep her child a secret, or face dire consequences. The chilling implications were clear. Mark Jensen wasn't just a rival, he was a manipulator, a saboteur, driven by a toxic cocktail of jealousy and ambition. Alexander arranged for Sophia to move into a comfortable, secure apartment, fully supported by Thorne Industries, ensuring she and Leo would never again face hardship. He dedicated more time to Leo, picking him up from school, reading him bedtime stories, and slowly, gently, building the foundation of a father-son relationship. He spent hours talking with Sophia, recounting their past, filling in the gaps of his own ignorance, and allowing the old intimacy to slowly, tenderly, rekindle. Sophia flinched, a fresh wave of fear crossing her features. He's powerful. Alexander, you know that. He'll fight back, viciously. He'll twist everything, use his influence to discredit me, to hurt Leo. Her experience of Mark's insidious reach had left deep scars. The world watched as the formidable CEO of Thorne Industries, once a symbol of cold ambition, began to transform. He was still a brilliant businessman, but now his actions were driven by a deeper purpose, the unwavering love for his son and the woman who had bravely protected him. The family he never thought he'd have was finally within his grasp, a testament to the fact that even the most hardened hearts could be softened by unexpected love and the triumph of truth. The new chapter of their lives, forged in the fires of adversity, was just beginning, promising a future built on love, trust, and the profound joy of a family finally reunited. Years flowed like a gentle river from the tumultuous rapids of the past. Mark Jensen's name became a distant, cautionary whisper in the annals of corporate history, his fate sealed by the very ambition and malice that had once defined him. For Alexander Thorne, Sophia Lee, and young Leo, life began anew, blossoming into a vibrant tapestry of shared moments and rekindled love. Alexander stared at the name Mark Jensen on the report, his vision blurring with a white-hot rage that simmered beneath his cool exterior. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying precision. Mark had orchestrated his breakup with Sophia, poisoned his perception of her, and then systematically tormented her for years, all to prevent the truth from surfacing. He had stolen Alexander's past, undermined his present, and almost robbed him of his future with his son. Alexander's transformation was not merely external, it permeated the very core of his being. The man who had once been a rigid automaton of ambition now exuded a warmth that was both disarming and genuine. His days still involved the strategic demands of Thorne Industries, which flourished under his leadership, driven now by a more profound sense of purpose. But the cold, sterile office was no longer his sole sanctuary. His true haven lay within the walls of their home, where laughter replaced silence and familial warmth melted away the lingering vestiges of his past isolation. The pain of discovery was immense, a sharp, searing agony that cut through Alexander's emotional armor. He felt a profound sense of guilt for his own blindness, for having allowed himself to be so easily deceived. He had believed Sophia had abandoned him, when in reality, she had been fighting a lonely, terrifying battle for their child, all while being systematically isolated by a venomous enemy. His mornings, once a solitary ritual of self-discipline, now began with Leo's enthusiastic greetings. Dropping Leo off at his prestigious private school, a stark contrast to the humble daycares Sophia had struggled to afford, became the highlight of Alexander's day. He would crouch down, tie loosened, a soft smile on his face, as Leo recounted dreams of superheroes and dinosaurs. The sight of Leo's bright, eager face, so full of innocent joy, was a daily reminder of the precious life he had almost missed. His initial detachment crumbled, replaced by fierce protectiveness he hadn't known he possessed. Leo was not just an unknown variable, he was his son, a tangible link to a love he had forsaken, a living testament to Sophia's silent suffering. The pure, innocent face of the boy, who had so trustingly called him Daddy, flashed before his eyes. He thought of Eleanor's tears, her unwavering belief. The thought of Sophia, struggling alone, enduring such cruelty, ignited a fire within him. Sophia, no longer burdened by fear or poverty, thrived. She had found her calling at the Thorn Philanthropic Foundation, spearheading initiatives to support single mothers and provide educational opportunities for underprivileged children. Her empathy, honed by years of hardship, allowed her to connect deeply with those she helped, and her intelligence, previously untapped, flourished in a supportive environment. Alexander watched her, brimming with quiet pride, fully supporting her endeavors and admiring the woman she had become. Their love, forged in the crucible of adversity, deepened with each passing day. It was a love built not on naive romance, but on shared understanding, forgiveness, and an unwavering commitment to their shared future. Alexander closed the file, his hands trembling. The cold, logical CEO was gone, replaced by a man consumed by a primal urge for justice. Mark Jensen would pay. For the years of Sophia's suffering, for the stolen moments with his son, for the calculated deception that had fractured his life, the investigation was no longer about uncovering a truth. It was about delivering vengeance, about righting a profound wrong. He would reclaim his family, no matter the cost. The buried past had finally erupted, and Alexander Thorne was ready for the war that was about to begin. The raw fury that had seized Alexander after uncovering Mark Jensen's insidious plot began to cool, replaced by a chilling determination. The meticulous reports detailing Sophia's suffering and Mark's relentless machinations had shattered Alexander's hardened worldview. But one last, undeniable piece of the puzzle remained irrefutable scientific proof of Leo's paternity. Despite his mother's unwavering conviction and the uncanny resemblance, Alexander's logical mind demanded definitive evidence. He had arranged for a discreet, highly reputable DNA test. Eleanor Thorne, the formidable matriarch, had truly found her deepest joy in her grandson. Her stately mansion, once a grand, silent echo of her son's lonely childhood, now resounded with Leo's playful shouts and his infectious giggles. She doted on him, sharing stories, teaching him piano, and indulging his every whim with a grandmotherly affection that Alexander had rarely witnessed. Seeing Alexander and Sophia navigating parenthood with such grace and observing the blossoming of their family filled her with a profound satisfaction she had long yearned for. Her own past regrets about Alexander's upbringing were slowly eased by the vibrant, loving family they had become. The day the results were due, Alexander's perfectly calm demeanor was a fragile facade. He sat in his expansive office, the city sprawling indifferent outside his window, but his gaze was fixed on the oak door, awaiting Ms. Davies. His heart, a muscle he often ignored in his pursuit of corporate dominance, hammered with an unfamiliar rhythm against his ribs. It wasn't fear of the unknown, but a profound trepidation about the truth, about what acknowledging it would mean for the meticulously constructed edifice of his life. The Thorne household was a lively, happy place. Family dinners were filled with animated conversations. Leo's colorful drawings adorned the refrigerator, and the scent of Sophia's home cooking permeated the air. Weekends were reserved for family adventures, trips to the zoo, picnics in Central Park, and quiet evenings curled up on the couch, reading Leo's favorite storybooks. Alexander, once rigid and unyielding, now found immense pleasure in the spontaneity of family life. He learned to laugh louder, to embrace imperfections, and to cherish every fleeting moment. He even rediscovered his own capacity for play, often joining Leo in elaborate Lego constructions or boisterous games of tag in the garden. When Ms. Davies finally entered, her face was unreadable, a professional mask that betrayed nothing. She carried a single, unassuming manila envelope. Alexander's hand, usually steady enough to sign billion-dollar contracts without a tremor, shook almost imperceptibly as he reached for it. He tore open the seal, the crisp sound echoing loudly in the silent room. Thorne Industries, under Alexander's evolved leadership, continued to prosper, but its priorities had shifted. He championed ethical practices, invested heavily in employee well-being, and steered the company towards more sustainable and socially responsible ventures. He was no longer just a titan of industry. He was a respected visionary, a leader who understood that true wealth lay not in accumulated capital, but in the well-being of people and community. The shadow of Mark Jensen's downfall served as a constant reminder of the destructive nature of unchecked ambition and bitter jealousy. Alexander often reflected on how close he had come to becoming a twisted version of his rival, a man lost in a pursuit that would have ultimately left him hollow. His eyes scanned the document. Paternity probability 99.999%. Leo, with his bright eyes and compassionate heart, was a testament to their journey. He was a curious, confident child, loved unconditionally by his father, his mother, and his doting grandmother. He carried within him the resilience of his mother and the sharp intellect of his father, a perfect blend of the two lives that had converged so unexpectedly. The words seared themselves into his mind. Leo, his son. The shock was a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. The reality, stark and undeniable, was laid bare before him. This wasn't a corporate conspiracy, not a random act of fate. This was his child, a living, breathing connection to a past he had dismissed and a future he had never contemplated. Alexander Thorne's story became more than just a tale of corporate triumph. It was a testament to the transformative power of unexpected love, the arduous journey of redemption, and the profound healing strength of family. He had once believed he would never have children, never feel the deep, unconditional bond of a parent, but fate, in its infinite wisdom, had delivered a small boy who called him Daddy, opening his heart to a world of joy, purpose, and love he never knew existed. His life, once a stark monument to ambition, was now a vibrant celebration of connection. The empty spaces had been filled, not with achievements, but with love, laughter, and the joyous chaos of a true family. A wave of conflicting emotions crashed over him. There was the bitter taste of regret, a crushing weight of guilt for the 5 years of Leo's life he had missed. For Sophia's solitary struggle, there was the burning resentment towards Mark Jensen, whose cruelty had orchestrated this devastating separation. But beneath it all, a fragile, exquisite warmth began to bloom in the desolate landscape of his heart. It was a sensation he had never experienced, a deep, resonant pull, a fierce protectiveness towards the small, innocent boy who now bore his lineage. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Stay with us for the next one, and while you're here, check out our other videos. There's always more to explore. He looked at the report again, then at the small, brightly colored drawing Leo had given him a few days prior, a stick figure family with one very tall daddy. A ghost of a smile, soft and unfamiliar, touched Alexander's lips. He had never imagined feeling this potent mix of fear, responsibility, and an overwhelming, unfamiliar tenderness. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. Ms. Davies, Alexander said, his voice husky, devoid of its usual sharp edge. Initiate the legal proceedings for full parental custody immediately and ensure Sophia Lee is notified. I want to meet with her again, as soon as possible. No, arrange for her to be brought here discreetly, comfortably, provide her with anything she needs. His priorities had irrevocably shifted. The corporate empire, once his sole focus, suddenly seemed secondary to the small, trusting hand that had reached for the child, once perceived as an unwelcome complication, was now the very core of his existence. Alexander, the man who had thought he'd never have children, felt an unfamiliar joy swelling within him. His mother's unwavering smile, the one that had held so much hope, now made perfect sense. She had seen what he was too blind to see, too hardened to feel. He stood and walked to the panoramic window, looking out at the city that had once represented his undisputed reign. Now, it felt different. The impersonal skyscrapers seemed less imposing, the vastness of the city less isolating. He saw it not as a battleground for power, but as a backdrop for a new life, a life brimming with unknown possibilities, guided by a force far more powerful than any business strategy fatherhood. The cityscape of New York stretched endlessly below, a glittering tapestry of ambition and opportunity. From the panoramic windows of his top-floor office, Alexander Thorne, CEO of Thorne Industries, surveyed his domain. At 32, he was a titan in the tech world, a man whose name was synonymous with innovation and ruthless efficiency. His personal life, however, was as stark and meticulously organized as his professional one. Alexander's childhood had been a crucible of privilege and neglect. Born into one of the city's most influential families, he had witnessed firsthand the devastating effects of fractured relationships and the relentless pursuit of power. His parents' marriage was a cold alliance, their interactions devoid of warmth, their children merely assets in a grand, calculated game. This upbringing had forged Alexander into a man of steel, brilliant, decisive, and utterly detached from emotional entanglements. Love, to him, was a weakness, a vulnerability that could compromise his carefully constructed empire. Children were an even greater complication, unpredictable variables in a life he sought to control with absolute precision. He had long ago decided that marriage and fatherhood were not for him. His ambition consumed him, leaving no space for the chaotic beauty of family life.